right, and welcome back to another episode of The Brass and the Truth. Today, Redleg and I are going to tackle mental health in the military, what we think about the system itself between behavioral health availability, effectiveness, what the process is, what the effects are, and some scenarios in which we've seen, both in our personal experiences and through stories, how leadership has either failed or succeeded to provide for the mental health of the soldiers in the service. Red Leg, take it off. Today we're going to talk about behavioral health, what it is, what's provided, what affects mental health in the service, and how leaders affect that.
So obviously all the branches do have some type of behavioral health or mental health program. Um, there's multiple types of programs within them. Now, each one deals with different things, like assisting with family issues, or you can go to your chaplain, or you can just go to the official clinic for behavioral health. But the DoD has one particular guidance on behavioral health that they all have to follow, and we'll cover what those are exactly. Now, I saw behavioral health for quite a while. I might touch on a little bit on exactly why that is. I know Agro did it for a time as well, but the way that my provider put it is that the military kind of created as kind of checking the box for the government and others to say, like, yeah, we're trying to take care of behavioral health. It sounds good when you read into it and seeing what they provide and all those other stuff, but there's still a lot of room to improve, and that is what we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, so one of those check the box moments is within the behavioral system. We often see mandatory checkups based on a regulatory timeline. And so often when we think of mental health, we probably don't think of a diagrammed flow chart of from this stage to this stage to this stage to this stage, or maybe some people do with very overarching things like the 12 stages of grief or whatever. But when it comes to providing those mental health services to soldiers, we do have diagrams, we do have stages and steps, and it's because we're trying with some effect to protect the effectiveness of the service member and the service to be combat ready. And so in some ways that can lead to treating and rehabilitating soldiers with mental health issues. In some ways that can be not treating them and chaptering them through medical evaluation. And then you could have a situation where the mental health system is not taking care of the soldiers and not providing adequate care. And then this presents the greatest problem and or threat, whether it be through eventual suicidal ideation by the soldier or just depreciated effectiveness. I think the Air Force has actually a really good breakdown, and I saw the diagram in your notes, Redleg, that talks about vectoring to, and even the Navy continues to use that language of vectoring to by identifying what the issue is for that soldier and then sending them to the right treatment. Did you see this flow work personally, or seen this in person?
As the best way you personally, if you're wanting to try and find out about behavioral health within each individual branches, all you gotta do is just type down like Navy, Air Force, whatever, and then type in behavioral health, and you'll find them. They're usually at the very top of Google. The big one in particular that I was talking about is on Air Force Medicine.af.mil. And yeah, this flow chart is in that pamphlet, um, and it's a good reference tool because it's pretty much used across all branches. Um, Obviously, neither one of us served in the Navy. There may be some slight differences, but this is definitely the same as it is in the Army. And we can go more into detail exactly how admission and remission and who is eligible for separation and who is not, and all that stuff through behavioral health.
Yeah, I actually just kept reading further. This is a more well put together pamphlet than what I saw when I was in, because it even has a chart of will you be likely to be retained with this disorder, that disorder, will you be likely to deploy or even be able to do your job? And so it covers some of the probably bigger name disorders. But I think for those of you that do go look at these sites, the first question would be, are you going to mental health for a disorder or regular stressors that could lead to greater problems? And later we'll talk about a specific story that happened recently with suicide. Often when we talk about behavioral health, we want to talk about preventative care and, leadership preventing the need for clinical behavioral health, because oftentimes it will be said, we could have done something, or we could have seen the signs, or you name the euphemism. People typically look back and say, somebody knew. And I could say from personal experience that the behavioral health system is flawed in a number of ways. That while I never expect it to be perfect, the number one issue I could see, and Red Lake, tell me if you see this too, is I could never get an effective appointment schedule because there were not enough providers when I was in for my soldiers. And when they did go, it always felt like this struggle against either leadership for the ability to go. Is protected time. So at one point they were like, no, they've got to go, right? And then combating between, whether or not they had the time with their own family schedule and how long it took to get secondary appointments. The follow ups were too far apart.
Yeah, they were. Now, obviously, that varies from uh, base to base. Now, obviously, from the Army, because we can really only get from that perspective. Each brigade has their own behavioral health. So you go and see that unit's behavioral health. So like in instance, say like you're in second brigade, you can't go see third brigade's behavioral health. So that is part of the reason why it takes a lot longer. And usually each, what were they called? Attachments, I think is they're called Yeah, sort of in the but anyways, there's probably about 4 or 5 individuals that were actual behavioral health doctors. Everyone else was either like an assistant or um, they were the individual in charge of that detachment and so on. So it could take a month plus to get a follow up. So it can be slow, and especially what makes it worse is if you get stuck with someone who is not in the service. So a lot of times the military has to outsource individuals who are in the military because there's not enough military personnel doctors in behavioral health. They have to hire individuals who are civilians, so they don't really know what it's like to be in the military. I got lucky enough and got someone who was, so she was able to understand a lot of what I was going through. But that's also a negative is when they are in the service, like anyone else, they have to move on or they had to go and do some training. For instance, with mine, she had to go do some training, so she was gone for like a month. So I had to go see someone else. And then when the brigade had to go to GRTC, she had to go with them. So I had to go see someone else in the office, a civilian. So then again, yeah, they have share documents, can review the documents, but sometimes you have to reiterate a lot of the same stories to the individual. It's not like in the civilian world that you can pretty much get lucky and talk to the same individual over and over again and have appointments every couple of weeks or whatever. And then eventually you had to move on too. So eventually you gotta get a new doctor when you change duty stations too. And yeah, obviously the paperwork follows you, but still. Some doctors that you have that are in the military, they may have to go away for schooling, or they have to get they again reassigned, so you get a whole new doctor, and vice versa, where you end up having to get reassigned to a whole new base, and that leads you to get to a whole new doctor as well.
I had soldiers come to Korea with issues that were not fully resolved in their previous location, which is weird, right? You can not deploy to CENTCOM without remission, but you can PCS to other locations with ongoing mental struggles. If it's not up to the level of disorder, that means you are going to lose those doctors that you were working with. And now I think recently the DoD allowed for virtual meetings. So there's a possibility that you could maintain the same provider, but there's no guarantee.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of that because of COVID. But if you take a look at that um, pamphlet from the Air Force, there's a couple of pages down from that flow chart. It does kind of tell you uh, who is eligible for deployment, who's not. For all your listeners, if you do happen to find this pamphlet on the Air Force website, again, it's airforcemedicine.af.mil. There's a portal to the mental health, and there's one that's for overview for service members. And it actually again kind of gives you examples of who is still deployable and who potentially is not, and those who aren't. To kind of get an idea exactly what Agra is talking about.
Do you have any personal experiences where, like for me, I went to behavioral health, I think maybe a month into being a platoon leader, with the idea that I wanted to see, because I kept hearing it before I took the platoon, whether in training, whether in my staff time right before, I kept hearing they never have enough appointments, they never have enough appointments. So I went. I was like, all right, I'm just gonna schedule one. I need to see what the process is like because clearly I'm hearing it. I don't have any proof because they keep scheduling it, and my people keep, having to miss training for this or that. And when I went, I think it took a month to schedule out. It took 3.5 hours sitting in the waiting room by myself, mind you. There was maybe one other person who came in around that time. And I sat there for 3.5 hours waiting to get seen. I got seen. They didn't ask for follow up appointments. They didn't want to see me again except through the exit survey or whatever. And mind you, I talked to them about things in my life and where I was at. I tried to make it realistic so like it wouldn't they didn't know I was testing. I was just going through the motions of it. And it was an abysmal experience. The provider seemed uninterested. I felt like my time was being wasted. And I did feel bad that I spent 4+ hours in the total process not available to my troops. And it was a nightmare for me.
Yeah, I've heard the same story from other individuals. It really just comes down to the provider themselves. I don't know if it was mainly those who were in service or not in service that were more interested or not. I can only speak on my experience. Mine was concerned. She was trying to do all she could to help me out, but she only do what was within the regulations. And that's how I learned a lot about some of the issues about the Army, and not just Army, but the DoD's policy and regulations on behavioral health was through her because of the fact she talked about how there are a lot of red tape. There's like one on medications. Obviously, in the military, they don't want to give medications and officials because you're going to combat. They don't want you going through hallucinations or whatever. But it's a last resort. Even if you have PTSD, is kind of a last resort. They try to do all they can to have you go through other types of treatments. I kind of had to beg to get the medications because they were trying to do all those other things, and I just kept on having to tell them like this is not going to work at all. And even on my own time, I have tried to do this stuff. It's just not going to work. But what caused me to go was the investigation that was going on. Started causing me to have some past trauma kick in, and I wanted to try and get some help on that stuff of handling that. That's where I was diagnosed with the anxiety and one form of depression, which a lot of people think there's like one form of depression when there's actually several different variants of it. Um, but as things got worse and worse, because in my situation, this started in 2021 and it didn't end until late 2023. And I was just at a point, it was just so, it was mentally too much for me. I almost felt like I was going to snap um, because it was just mentally draining for me. And she just said that there's just nothing that behavioral health can do for me to help my med board to go through, even though I was getting a claim for mental health, which I think at the time it was 20%, but it's now at 30%. The only way that they could even do anything for me was if the claim that I was suicidal or was going to hurt someone else. That was the only way that they can honestly do anything. But they weren't able to whisper in the ears of the division commander or anybody to try and get the process done to let them know what the process of the investigation and all that was just too much for me mentally. And that is one of the flaws, in my opinion, of behavioral health.
I gotta ask, do you feel like at any point you resisted drugs before, this incident, or any point where you would have been resistant to taking them before this? Because I think another issue, and
Yeah, I mean, you know me since college and all that. I mean, I never saw behavioral health before then. I was very reluctant about anything regarding behavioral health before the military, especially before my incident, just because of past incidents. That's not for this type of show or anything. Um, but I definitely would not want to have gone into medication at all. This is not something I would have wanted to do. Uh, but because of the past childhood trauma I've had, and then adding in the mental strain I went through with the investigation and everything, at this point, I kind of had to. Like right now, I've ran out of the medication. There's some complications going on. It's getting situated, but I'm kind of going through a little bit of the withdrawal right now, and I do feel quite more irritable and all that stuff. So, I can definitely say, and you probably can even say yourself, knowing from prior to the incident and after the incident that I am a little bit more agitated, more irritable, and stuff like that. And that's even going through behavioral health.
right. I continue to wonder because I had people who resisted behavioral health in that they didn't want to be seen in a certain light, 'cause there was a stigma even that if you went to see behavioral health, that you were a soldier in crisis, that you had this issue with you or whatever. And so, like, it was the wrong mentality to have, but I know people had it. So, because it was had by some, there were many leaders who were like, well, they're going to behavioral health. They're not available to me. They're, in essence, a piece of garbage to me because I can't use them. And it was like, no one would ever dare to say that out loud. But
Yeah.
if you had that back and forth between being irritable, being this way on or off drugs, you get off of it and then come back into the fold, you might be viewed as a better soldier by the leadership, but be worse off because you're not getting the help you need. And so there was definitely stigmas to it that I think caused people to avoid behavioral health, or just the fact that it being a struggle to get appointments, to get medication, etc. I think a lot of my soldiers gave up on behavioral health. They were like, I'm not going to go. What are they going to do anyway?
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's only certain types of treatments. So, like the doctor I had, she said that they can only do short term treatment, not long term treatment. So, that's another problem with behavioral health is that with certain mental conditions, short term treatment isn't enough. You need to have long term treatment. So the way how they're seeing it, short term treatment is for those to basically, okay, here's what you need to do. Now get on the road and get going. you're not supposed to go there basically the rest of your career. But there are some type of mental conditions, as everyone knows, requires that permanent treatment. And it's the same thing with medication, is that it's supposed to be seen as a short-term solution, but there are some people that's like, say, bipolar. Those individuals need to have it long term. Now, I don't know what type of mental health is not allowed in the military, not allowed, but we'll just use them as an example. They have to stay on the medication, but in the case of the military, they're saying that it's only temporary. So eventually, they're supposed to take them off the medication and let them get going on the way. That is another false. That has, even that doctor said, that doesn't always work. You do need to have the long term treatment.
Yeah, 100%.
As you were saying, the stigma, there were. I mean, obviously you would come across leaders where like, crap, soldiers seeing behavioral health, like maybe we need to be a little bit more easygoing on an individual, like make sure they're doing all right and everything. But there were some that were saying like, oh, he's weak minded or whatever. He's only going to behavioral health because he's a coward about the him being, going through the grind of initiation, I guess you could say, stuff like that. But usually you might experience that from, maybe a sergeant of a private or, junior officer or whatever. This kind of, if you're in the military, you kind of know which ranks are behaving in some type of manner. But yeah, like privates and specialists, you don't typically see them go to behavioral health, but I was surprised to learn how many sergeants were going to behavioral health um, with the ones I was working with. Like there was a lot saying they have gone or they are going. A lot of it was because of either past deployment issues or anger problems. And when you talk to them, what anger problems, a lot of them will say is because they were just very frustrated with leadership. Now, either that's past leadership or a single individual or an entire command team.
100%. Well, and so this takes us to, you know, what allowances leadership makes for it, and then how leadership affects mental health in the first place. So I'll let Redleg talk about the situation with Baston and the recent training events, but one thing we find most often is this stigma exists for reasons that, are perpetuated continuously, right? It could go away in a generation of soldiers at a post or base. If you show up and, the command team is constantly verbalizing the use of behavioral health, encouraging soldiers to go, protecting the time, and then making decisions that support the health of the soldier are present, that environment will hold fast. Whereas if you show up and it's not that way, it could change as easily as a couple leaders PCSing and moving on. What we experienced is one leader really could make the difference at certain levels. I'm resistant to the idea that one leader can control everything in an environment, because there's subsequent leaders between them and the lowest person on the totem pole, for lack of a better term. But there are things that provide an environment. So, like, if the general of Corps puts out a decision that eliminates extra time for this, that, or the other, that 100% can cause, continual issues in a unit. But if it's anyone in between, protecting the soldiers, providing the time, there's ways to get around that, depending on what it is. Now, diving more towards what you're about to talk about, there are things that lower level leaders can do or do not do that cause the grand issues of exacerbating lesser problems, right? Your
Mm-hmm.
average soldier is going to be stressed in the field. They're going to be stressed when they have to pull long hours or they have family issues going on. Those things are not inherently behavioral health issues on their own. Like, oh, I spent, 2 weeks to a month in the field. and away from my family, that's something that soldiers expect to do. It's something that, there's usually some warning ahead of. It's when leaders are not taking care of soldiers in those environments, extend the time beyond what was expected, which is sometimes unavoidable, but it's when they don't communicate that to their soldiers or do not at lower levels stay with their soldiers. There's something about a friend in your foxhole that's a greater resource than a command team that cares. My example is I was an XO. We were doing a field training. Was not really that long, to be honest. It might have been a week, um, but it covered Father's Day, and my commander, being a father himself, left the day before for a meeting at battalion. Went home, spent time with his family, spent the whole day of Father's Day with his family, and then came back out to the field after. And my soldiers were livid. They were ready to riot because they found out. Honestly, they might not have known and it would have been better. But the fact that they knew he went home just turned their insides out.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't an individual who was a general or a corps commander, and this is a company commander. Everyone knows what the company commander is doing, really. Some company commanders think that, oh, I'm the company commander. No private is going to know what I'm doing. Oh, these privates know, sir or ma'am, what you're doing more than what you think. You have a lot more attention on you than what you actually do. And also, just to give you a heads up, the lieutenants are whispering in the ears of those privates and specialists what you're doing. Don't think that those lieutenants always have your back, because I mean, I don't know how your company commander was. I mean, well, he did kind of tell me about how they were. But anyways, if you're not really good company commander, just because you're the company commander does not mean those lieutenants are gonna have your back. And it may let it slip that you went home and spent some time with your family on Father's Day. Not saying that you did it or anyone else, but I'm just using it as an example.
Yeah. So, I mean, it goes to leaders being aware of how they affect their soldiers. For those that might listen to this and may eventually lead troops, every action you have, while this may be a huge burden and weight to bear, every action you have can affect the mental health of your soldiers. Whether you be, a young sergeant or team leader, all the way up to being, the battalion commander, it makes a difference when you're present, when you show understanding and willingness to get in the mud with someone else. I think ruck marching is a great example of, or is a great measuring stick of where your team's at. Because while a bunch of people will be like, "What? This guy's crazy," I found that the days that my soldiers were piping up, yelling, singing songs without needing prompting, and this is road march, not forced, because forced march is the worst. Leaders, please, please, please. This is an opinion, Red Leg. You can tell me if you agree or not. But forced ruck marches are the freaking worst. It's your team's not going to get the physical benefit out of it. They're going to break their ankles and they're
Mm-hmm.
going to hate you because
Yeah.
you're going to have to do it at certain times. But if it's just a regular day of PT, you're an idiot if you think a forced ruck march is a morale builder. You want to
Mm-hmm.
throw rucks on their back, get them to hype up and, joke with each other. Keep the spacing, but laugh amongst yourselves. And then at the end well, debatable on how much weight you're doing, but we sprinted out. I mean, I ran most of my rucks and it was fun because we embraced that suck together.
Yeah, a lot of leaders don't realize how important morale is. They just disregard it at times. But how it relates to what we're talking about in mental health is morale does tie into mental health, because if a soldier's mental health gets low enough, you'll either have two types of reaction. Either the individual is going to be so angry where they're going to explode in just yell and scream, hit the wall or whatever, or they're going to go into a deep mode of depression and may become suicidal or whatever. So your action as a leader on the morale can have an effect on the soldier's mental health as well. And as the story Agro said I'm going to talk about, which I'll get into in a moment, there was an incident. So not saying it's related, but it's a weird coincidence. But you just, as a leader, if you are now or will be, you just need to think and just be considerate of your soldiers. Like, yes, you need to be a good leader. Make sure they're prepared to do their job, but you gotta also take care of that soldier's morale. And again, they do tie into each other. So, at Fort Campbell, and I'll remind everybody, and those who are new, during my time, man, I was stationed at Fort Campbell, and they have a division-wide exercise called Operation Lethal Eagle. This is quite new. This was introduced by General McGee. So a few years ago. Now, it is advertised as a 21-day exercise. I'll just leave it at that because sometimes it varies depending on the unit and who you are. But they basically concluded their OLE, Operation Lethal Eagle, on the 11th. Now, a great count to follow if you're a big fan of Army WTF moments, you want to know specifically on Fort Campbell, is 101st Meaning Eagles. Now, this go ahead and let you know on this portion, this is legitimate, but sometimes you can't always verify what they're saying because, you got the private news network. But Bastion Brigade, 1st Brigade, there was what was called a hard backstop on the 11th, meaning that across the division, everyone had to be done with OLE by the 11th. Well, it came down through Bastion Brigade that they were going to extend it on the 14th. Talk about 21 days out in the field, and now you're just about to get done, and you're a soldier, and now you're being told, sorry, you're going to be out here for additional 3 days. So it's going to be turned into a 24-day. This is nearly a month, which is not normal at Fort Campbell. At Fort Campbell, usually the training exercises at minimum is only a couple of days, at most 2 weeks. That's only if you're doing a battalion exercise. And even then, sometimes it can be done within 10 days. So 21 days, this is the biggest and longest training exercise that they have. So all these individuals are now having, in the cross Bastion Brigade, had to tell their wives or husbands and kids that I'm going to have to be stuck out here for another 3 days. This is one of those circumstances that could have some type of effect on the soldiers, not just their morale, but the mental health, because they've been gone from like wives or husbands and kids for a while already, and you're just going to add more days to it. They already missed their family as it is. And based on the information that was provided to the account was that the Bastion HQ was saying this was coming from division. Well, the follow-up was saying that this was not a division mandate. This was directly coming from Bastion, and that apparently they were not meeting their training objectives, and Bastion 6 wanted them to stay out there additional 3 days to make sure that they were going to meet those training objectives. Obviously, there's no way for me to verify that because I don't have any connections with the brigade anymore because it's been too long. But I would say this is not surprising to me whatsoever if this was to be true, because this happens a lot within Bastion. A lot of times, no matter what type of circumstances it is, either through orders or individual incidents where like you're going through legal stuff or whatever it is, they will make some goofy order or they will screw up something and they will put the blame on the division. They will say, "Oh, it's division. Division's putting out this order," or "Division screwed this up." Whatever. They do this all the time, and then later on you'll find out it was actually Bastion all along. Again, I can't verify that, but I will guarantee that is the case. Now, obviously, as I mentioned, Fort Campbell is not like the other bases where you're out there for a month long or whatever. Also, for this mention as a side comment by somebody, there's no reason why Bastogne could have come back to the rear on the hard stop of the 11th, recover, and go back out there for 2 or 3 days, a week or two, whatever, before the next big training exercise. Because as someone like me who was at Fort Campbell, I know how the training schedule works. There's plenty of time between the two exercises. There's usually around about a month gap between the two. So there's no reason why they couldn't come back, recuperate, let the soldiers see their families for a while, and then go back out there during the midweeks in the following week or two and do whatever Bastogne 6 wanted them to do. And to be ready to go for the next table exercise or whatever they were going to do. So, or they could have easily added those days to the next exercise that they wanted to. There's just no reason why they should have added days to OLE, especially when the division made a mandate that no one is to extend beyond 11th, which is actually something a commander cannot do. If their superior says they are not to do something, like in this case, extend beyond the hard stop, they can't just say, you know what, I'm just going to ignore it and keep on doing it. Which, to be honest, this happens a lot at Fort Campbell. A lot of the commanders will do this. For some reason, they try to have a little free reign on doing this, and normally they get away with it. Or at least that's the perspective that is given someone who's at a battalion level, that the commanders get away with doing stuff like this. I think that's where there's issues with some relaxation with the Army. But as I mentioned, the brigade extended their OLE operation to the 14th, but it recently got leaked out. Now, keep in mind, this is a draft. The brigade's memorandum for the GRTC rotation, which is 25-07, and they will be going on their GRTC rotation next month. So, they've already been out on the field for 21 days. Well, actually, this is when we release this episode, it's already been well past that. But anyways, you just inform them that they're going to be out there for additional 3 days. They know when GRTC is going to happen. So their families are already prepared for that coming days. GRTC, as everyone knows, who has served or is married to a service member, is 30 days. So this is going on a month before the brigade goes to their JRTC rotation. You're adding on 3 days to this 21-day training exercise because you're not happy with what's going on. I understand as commander, you got to string some necks a little bit, but not when you're about to go to JRTC and you have to start getting ready for loading on your vehicles to the semi-trucks, train, the barge, or whatever they're using this time around. The time I was there, we used a barge. The other time we used semis. The other time we used trains, all three of them. That is going to come up very quickly. So what's the purpose? You're already telling these soldiers, sorry, tell you, but you're going to be out here for another 3 days. And then Avon is going to be leaving here soon. In the next couple so weeks. And as anyone who has done a JRTC rotation, so soldiers go in waves. So, really is when you do in processing and then out processing is 30 days, but really sometimes you're there for 5 or 6 weeks, depending on if you're Avalon again. So these guys are losing really a lot of time with their families in a very short amount of time. You gotta really think how much this is probably affecting not just their morale and mental health, but the mental health of their spouse, so they have one, and if they have kids too. And we're not even in wartime. So
Right. And one of the biggest things to that is the predictability for the family. As a soldier, training is going to happen. You're going to have days and weeks and months away. You expect deployments and things.
mhm.
But for childcare, for availability of the house, if you have family members or dependents that require additional care, and so some of that is mitigated through a family care plan, but for the most part, you can't family care plan your way out of the military entirely. I
Mm-mm.
mean, you literally can as a chapter, but you can't take people away from their families for an unexpected amount of time,
No, especially not
and
like
expect
this.
good things. Yeah.
No, and I need to add this too. So those who don't know, for GRTC rotation, you only need 75% of your force to be able to participate. Now, if you go onto 101st Munich Eagles, this is where you can find it, find the draft. It specifically states they want 90%. 90% of the force. That's well over. And they mentioned they want those going who are on a P3 and P4 profile. Those soldiers who are undergoing drug and alcohol rehab will participate in training and so on. And then when we get to one part, for me personally, that with me about to have a child, even around this time, because due date is early April, uh, it says all postpartum soldiers have a 12-month deferment from field duty or overseas assignment. So there's a lot of things with that saying more to the memorandum that if you are a male soldier and your wife is about to give birth around this time of GRTC, you're going to have to wait to have your leave for paternal leave after GRTC. And then on that too, he does say, the brigade commander, that it is on the discretion of the battalion commander to redeploy the soldier back to Fort Campbell for the pregnancy if the pregnancy is going to happen during JRTC. But there's no guarantee whatsoever that the soldier will be able to witness the birth of their child. And let's keep this in mind. This is not a combat deployment. This is a deployment rotation, training deployment to JOTC, where again, there's only needs to be a 75%, not 90% like he's requesting. Obviously, there's not going to be that many soldiers whose wives are going to have pregnancies then. So who knows?
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
you can't plan for, oh, it might not be many.
yeah, you can't plan that either. But the thing is, so too, is you also know that you don't need to maintain 75% throughout the entire course of it. You just need to show up with 75% at JRTC. You don't need to maintain it throughout the entire time. So that's how it works.
Okay.
So that is another thing. Just with JRTC and ATC, you show up with 75%, but that doesn't mean you need to maintain 75% throughout the entire event. As is part of the checklist of things that you need to accomplish become deployable. Is can you produce 75 deployable soldiers by this date or whatever?
Well, and so
For it.
I want to stick to the mental health track on this. At 75% and the strain for that for commanders, let's talk about the drive for commanders to push that.
Yeah.
Look at it from the commander's side of, and applied to other trainings and other even local stuff, how that can affect the mental readiness and
Yeah,
mental health
because
of soldiers.
even as you mentioned, he does talk about mental health, and he does say that mental health personnel will be present, and they can get their treatment while at JRTC. And he's saying if any soldier who is pregnant or who is not having a due date within 60 days of the start of JRTC will be at JRT.
And you're talking about the op board, right?
The draft of the memorandum, yeah, of it.
Right.
This is just the personnel, like who will be participating in JRTC. Um, but yeah, I mean, he really covers his bases on who can participate. But a lot of this, as you said, was stick with mental health. But a lot of this can be mental health because you gotta think like there is some stress level because you gotta think about those who are trying to go through rehab and now you're trying to tell them they had to go to JRTC. They're probably stressing about the fact like, am I going to rehab? And then you also got to think about the person who is probably pregnant that isn't within that 60-day window, and they're, as you know, you probably heard plenty of people who talk about how female soldiers had miscarriages because of training events and that, and they're probably stressing through that mode right now of like, how am I going to protect not just myself but my child while I go through JRTC and all that stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean we had a pregnant soldier go, but I mean I think the most stressful thing for her wasn't even Jersey. It was the coming back and the stuff after. Like you had mentioned, there's the mobilization and pre-deployment activities after. I think that was like it's just the recovery time that was rough. And that comes again, not just in JRTC. I think a lot of people see like the suicide that just happened at Campbell. I mean,
Which
people,
we'll talk about some more. There's recent information on that.
yeah, we see those happen around the big events, but I think people don't talk enough about the in between. I trust me, I get the stressors of the big trainings and whatnot. Some of that you are gonna have just because when it comes to moving a force of that size and the requirements and like a real deployment, combat deployment, is gonna obviously take its toll in a number of ways. It's the in between where we don't give our people time that we have similar issues stretched over a longer period that frustrates me. But if you want to talk about that incident and some of the more recent updates.
So yeah, so this soldier was with third brigade. There's Rakisans. He was with first of the Winth leader Rakisan. So some of the soldiers from his company let us slipped. Which company it was? Is Abu Company, so Alpha Company of first of the one event. So Clarksville now, which is the local Tennessee town, mentioned in an article his name and where he's from. He's from Dumfries, Virginia. He was 21 years old. Special Stephen Akinlotan, Akinlotan, died Monday afternoon in the Garrison area. So I think it was in the barracks, from what I can tell. And as any incident when a soldier dies is under investigation, but as everyone in the battalion has been saying within the Fort Campbell network has said it was a suicide, and apparently he did it in front of some of his peers.
Gosh.
And what is even more interesting, and as I texted you earlier, one of the Nashville local news is reporting on it too, and all they said was he had died and is being investigated. So Fort Campbell won't mention the word suicide. So there's a lot of questions. Like obviously, it's being investigated and everything. You can, I mean, you know the parameters much better than I do, but it is quite interesting. They won't mention that he committed suicide or anything.
Oh yeah, I
So I'll
mean,
let you mention that.
so yeah, dealing with soldier suicide on post has always been a sore topic. Obviously, not just for the and this is for the leadership. There's obviously the PR of it. If it's not one, it's like first off, what's going on in your post? I mean, look at the disappearance of Vanessa Gillen and
Yeah.
what a absolute cluster that was.
Yeah.
A lot of garrison commands and PAOs have now moved away from reporting initial findings just because they are terrified of the backlash that's going to come with these stories developing over time and then getting worse and worse and worse. So, and honestly, that's a smart thing to do. It is not great to run with half the information. The best thing to do, and technically speaking, there is a notification window. I'm sure the family has already been notified by this point. But there's a process for those notifications that has a timeline of when the notifying officer goes to see the family, how they set everything up, when there will be an official service. So they're moving pretty quick on the service itself, which is great. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they should move quickly, regardless of the circumstances of the soldier's death. They should do proper honors and whatnot.
Yeah.
Some people would disagree. Some people would be out there dissenting and disagreeing. It's like, guys, we can sit all day on the circumstance of his death. The fact is, guy died in uniform, in service, and he didn't take anybody else with him.
Mm-hmm.
Give him the funeral. In the after, you want to have a debate about it, fine. We had dead bodies, suicide by pills, all kinds of things happen where I'll tell you what, it's not just traumatizing for the people who saw it or the people in the unit. My guys have to, after seeing a dead body, go get counseling and whatnot, and that takes them off the road, out of service. And sometimes that was frustrating, but like it shook a couple people over the years. Like it is one of the most tragic things to lose somebody in that way. We had one of our own take his life and leave a note, and that wrecked a couple members of the unit. And I don't think they ever really recovered from it.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the investigation and what they'll say, they'll probably come out and say self-inflicted wound of some type, whether it's gunshot or other, and that'll come probably in the next 2 weeks, if
Yeah.
I had to guess.
So just to kind of quickly go over a little bit more on it. So the article came out on March 12th. So as I mentioned earlier, Operation Lethal Eagle was advertised a 21-day exercise. It said that he committed suicide. Well, he died on Monday, so that was March 10th. That was around the time that I saw the accounts talk about that there was a suicide. So that was a day before when there were supposed to be the hard stop for training. So that's again, or should I say, it depends on your unit. But that is strange again that so happened he got back from the back 40 and committed suicide. So I think there probably needs to be a thorough investigation what could cause it. Now, there has been mentioned by the news reporters or anyone within a PNN, again, that's Private News Network, if he was in behavioral health or anything. But to go over some of his awards, because this is, I think, becomes a little interesting. He had the Army Accommodation Medal, ARCOM, the Army Achievement Medal, AAM, Army Good Conduct Medal, and the Air Assault Wings. So he was being set up for making it to sergeant. He had been at Fort Campbell since 2022 and been in the Army since 2021. So he'd been there for a while. And based on some of the comments people had made towards the 101st Mimi Eagle account, they blame a lot on the leadership. And they have been saying that uh, the battalion has just been checking off the books like, oh, yep, someone committed suicide. So we gotta hand out these pamphlets about like how you can handle the situation, or if you're feeling this way as well, like him, go see them. Here are the classes, and so on. It's like they're just checking out the list, and someone says like the next day is like, oh, this is business as usual. It seems like they just keep on going. That's what some of the people within the battalion are saying. So, uh, obviously, you need more investigation. Obviously, people within the battalion probably need to speak up a little bit more about what's going on. But I'll leave it at that. But if there are some toxic leadership going on within Leader Rakasan, it's obviously not the same individuals that would have given him those awards because, as you know, toxic leaders wouldn't have taken the time to get him an AAM and the Archon.
Yeah, that touched some swords. And I no, but I think this is one of those incidents where it's very upfront what some of the issues are as far as the immediate training woes that we were talking about before. And you as you'd mentioned, not sure if he's going on behavioral health. I wonder how many people from this event, from this training cycle in general, were having the thoughts or had issues that led to major breakdowns in their relationship. And then I wonder what the knee jerk reaction of the command's going to be, because this is going to be one of those public things that affects what they do in the next few days.
Well, especially when the news has reached all the way down Nashville. I mean, that's a hour drive down south. But if they're hearing about it, Cable has a lot of eyes on them now. So they're going to have to provide an answer and they're going to have to show some results. It's not going to be one of those where it's going to be only isolated within the army and it can quietly disappear. It's going to be one of those points where the local community is going to want results. Now, as we mentioned earlier, behavioral health has a pathway. If treatment does not help those who are suicidal, they separate them. So if he was going through behavioral health, what did they do wrong? If he was not going through behavioral health, did people just completely miss the signs, or was this something out of the complete blue? I mean, there's a lot of questions. This is all complete speculations and everything. We really can't go into that type of mode. But I only mention it because this is something that the military has to do some reforms into behavioral health because, as I mentioned, when it comes to how the military goes about treating people with, depression or whatever, and about if only way for you to get separated is through being suicidal or wanting to harm others as the only way, it doesn't always work. As anyone knows with common sense that one day someone with depression or anything is perfectly fine, and the next day they can say, you know what, screw this, and they will commit suicide. It has happened plenty of time. They may not be suicide the next one day, and then the next day all of a sudden they are. So it's not like behavioral health is going to identify that if one day they aren't, and the next day they are.
Right. Well, and I know we're not going to solve all the problems for mental health in a day, but this, along with numerous incidents, I think if in a future episode, if we talk about Army aviation or bring up the Black Hawk pilot that got drunk, lifted off, and crashed, what, 2.5 years ago? Because scenarios like that are just like screaming, what can we do to prevent these? But we're running on time here.
Yeah,
in
we
this
can talk
episode, guys.
about.
I want to point out there are tons of resources for if you, as a service member, friend of, spouse of, potentially want to be a service member. There are tons of resources out there within the service and outside the service. If you need help, please reach out. Talk to your people. There's going to be people out there that say, well, there's always somebody nearby. There really is, and it's hard to see that when you're in those places, but no one wants to see your name on the news in any way other than they did an awesome thing. Nobody wants to lose their friend or their family member or their brother in arms. Please seek the help, no matter how small.
Yeah, and as we keep mentioning, you got behavioral health, but you also have your chaplains out there that in the military. Now they can't prescribe medications or do the proper treatments, but they can give you spiritual guidance and all that. They are considered individuals within the med corps that can give treatments, through spiritual guidance. And within the Air Force, chaplains are considered the same on that same category. You also have military one source across the board. And then also across the board, you have military and family life counseling. So this is not just for soldiers, but this is also for the family. So if you, as a family member, and you're going through struggles, you can talk to them as well. And then there's family and military and family readiness center. So it's kind of similar to the life counseling, but they do some different things as well. So there are plenty of sources, and we can also provide links to the different branches into the description of this episode, and not just to the branches, but also to the VA, their links, and also the phone number to their suicide hotline.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. And again, we're just encouraging you to reach out, or if you know somebody in those scenarios, reach out to them, because those are, if you're listening and you know someone in those dark places or you think they might have the signs, worst thing you can do is ask, hey man, how are you? So use those resources, reach out, and we hope that everyone, makes it through another day. For Redleg and me, that's the episode for today's The Brass and the Truth. We hope you guys stay safe out there.